Let me introduce myself. That's me. Hi, my name is Kasra. I run the mobile team at Stack Overflow. So that's our mobile applications. Very recently also became our mobile website. I am on my, I think 9th year of Android development. I've been doing Android development since the first Android Developer Phone Challenge, and even like when it was an emulator and we didn't have keyboards and anything. These days I do a lot of Android dev and I do a lot of everything else. So I'm going to talk about some stuff with a PM hat on, some stuff with like a user perspective hat on, and I might go on a rant about React at some point. Someone just like give me a weird sign if I do and I'll stop. I'm here to talk to you about instant apps because at Stack Overflow we do a lot of early access preview partnerships with Google, and I've been doing instant apps for a year and a half, I think, and I've been excited about them for a very long time. I've been talking to my coworkers about it for a really long time. They really don't want to hear about it anymore, so I'm here to talk to all of you about it instead. Okay, let's just get into it. Here's what we're going to talk about. It's kind of in 3 sections. I'm going to talk about what an instant app is. It's going to be a lot of rehash. If there was a talk at I/O a few months ago about an intro to Android instant apps, it's going to be a lot of rehash from that. Then we're going to dive right into the actions of, I have an app, I have a code base. I want to make an instant app out of that. What do I have to do? We're going to focus on the step-by-step, a lot of the actual, I'm not going to show Java, but we're going to talk about modules and packages and yay. And then we're going to zoom out a bit, and it's going to be, what's everything else around this world? How do we actually do instant apps? How do you actually launch it? What are you doing? What are you trying to look for? And some of the business side stuff. Cool, so I think I have a demo. Will it play? Oh, okay. Okay, so that's me. Click on a link in a Reddit app. And I don't have any other apps installed on this phone, but it's a link to stackoverflow.com. It opens up my, I don't know how to make it loop. I spent like 6 hours on that last night. But it opens up the instant app. It does this little loading thing. It's the Stack Exchange app. It drops you into this question and answer view. You can look at all the content. You can interact with it. You can vote. You can add an answer. You can add a comment. You can do whatever you want. The really cool thing is that like they didn't do anything. They just clicked on a link. It could have been in a Reddit app. It could have been a link from someone sending me a text. It's just someone being like, hey, look at this one piece of content, and I'm showing you that exact content in my native view. This is actually a hybrid view. There's a lot of web views going on in there for syntax highlighting, but it is native code. And the magic of that is, for me, as the person who's in charge of the entire flow of what happens when you click on a link, I mean, I've spent a lot of time working on my Android app, so I want you to install my Android app, but I also want you to just get what you're trying to get to. So the previous case was you would go on a mobile website, and it would be a little banner on the top that would say open an app, and it's like, why would you click on that? You came here to do something, you did it, move on with your life. The instant app is the same. There's not a lot of actual like, I'm not trying to get the user to install my full app. I could have a big button that says install the app, but I just want them to do what they want to do. And they come in, they can try, if they click on vote, it does a really cool seamless login, and then they can just hit back and move on with their lives. Or they can install my app and browse around. Or if they try to browse around, and it will ask them to do that. So it's just like, I'm trying to not get in their way. It sounds like a really, really low bar, but I'm just not trying to get in the way of the user so they can do what they're trying to do. Okay, so what is an instant app? Is that not gonna work? There we go. Okay, it's your native app running instantly without installation. That first part is the really big key here, is you're not writing new app. You're refactoring some stuff, but it's nothing that you don't already know. It's a new way of thinking about what you already know. You don't have to actually become an instant apps developer. You already know how to make instant apps. It becomes really easy to make something from scratch that can handle being an instant app and making it so we'll go into what the modules are and how you can do it. But the big key is it's your native app. It's somewhat new code, but it's references to the new code, but it's not like distinct. It's not something that's in a different branch. It's your regular app, and it can do a subset of what your app does. It can do everything your app does. It can do just one specific thing. For my case, the Stack Exchange app has a lot of stuff in it, and it's just the one subset of looking at a question and answer on Stack Overflow. If you try to add an answer, it asks you to install the install app. If you do anything else, it asks for the install app. Okay, so the main high-level overview of what it's going to give you is instant apps get the user to what they want to get to really fast, which is, we'll get into the specifics of how that works, but it's really, really cool. They let you change your entire goal as a mobile developer, from getting someone to install your app and engage, to getting them to actually do what they want to do. For me, that's interacting with our Q&A content. It's adding a comment, it's upvoting an answer, it's adding a new answer. It's all of the actual KPIs that everyone else looks at that's bigger than what my app's downloads are. And the last 2 points are the major big differentiator. Instant apps are side entry. You can have an instant app that has it's pinned to the launch screen on Android O, and you can have someone open it up without installing anything. But for the most part, they're not clicking on something from a launcher. They're clicking on a link in an email, a link in a text message, a link in an app, something that is being said like, hey, check out this cool thing. Click on that cool thing, it's going right into the cool thing. That also means they can have a bunch of different entrances. For my app, there's 4 or 5 different entry points. Only one of them is supported as an instant app right now. But it's the difference between opening up the front door to the house and walking around and being like, what's in this house? What's going on? What can I do? And saying, hey, look at that cool window. There's something happening inside there. I want to see what's going on. That made it sound a little like creeper, but still, you're coming in with an intent. You're not saying, let me go browse around and see what's going on. I said intent, but that's whatever, not relevant to that kind of intent. Okay, so the similarities and differences, they're the same project, the same code base. It's a new build variant in the same project. We'll get into how the variants work, but it's the exact same app, a different entrance into it. It can have sections of the app. It doesn't have to have everything the app does, but it's not a new thing. You're not writing new code. You're not writing throwaway code. You're going to be reusing a lot of code because it's actually the exact same thing. And the end result, it's the same package identifier. It's the same link on a Play Store. It's the same exact thing as your app. The differences. Okay, so when someone installs your app, there's a lot of things that you get from that in the sense of someone has said, hey, I want to interact with your company, with your app. A lot of those go away in the instant app side. There's a lot of restrictions, we'll get into in a second, but the entire flow of what is allowed, what you think you can do, what someone has told you they're okay with you doing, is totally different because all they did was click on a link. They didn't actually go on the App Store, look at your permissions, hit yes, I'm okay with this. So on the installed app side, you can do anything on the Android API that you already know. On the instant app side, there is some restrictions, and then I was not going to do this slide, and it ended up being the biggest slide. So there is a lot of restrictions. You haven't been installed, so you can't access a lot of defaults. You can't access external storage. Everything you do has to be in the foreground. You can't have any background services. You have to use the new Android runtime permission system, but outside of that, you actually only get to use some subset of Android runtime permissions. You have to handle what happens if someone says, no, I don't want to give you this permission. You can't do push notifications. You can't even get a persistent token for the user outside of the instant app session. So you can't hold on to anything they don't want you to hold on to. You can't make any calls to HTTP services. It all has to be HTTPS. And then there's a file size limit that sounds really scary. It terrified me when I first did it because I have a lot of assets, but ended up not being a big major thing. We'll get back into the file size thing in a bit. Okay, still looking at the overview. Benefits of instant apps with me as the PM and team lead of my team. I just let the user do what they want to do. I know I talked about this already, but this is vital to me. I have spent the past year working on what happens if someone lands on our mobile website and giving them an optimal mobile website experience, because I don't want someone download 1.5 megabytes of HTML and then say, hey, go install my app, because the content's right there. The answer to their question's right there. I want to give them that answer. This lets me do that while also getting the benefits of the native code that I've been sitting onto for years. The login flow in instant apps is really cool. You have to use Google Smart Lock if you do login. And Google Smart Lock lets you save passwords and authentication on the backend. That's you can do username and password, you can do Google login. The really cool thing for me is I think 87 or something like that percentage of Stack Overflow logins are Google accounts. So someone opens up my instant app, they're automatically logged in for the most part, which is pretty cool. And I'm not actually trying to get people to install my app. I want them to just have the experience they want. But there are some things that in my instant app, if you try to do, it upsells you to install the app instead. And I have proven track record from my results to show me that really is helping drive more installs to my app. Even though I don't really, that's not my main goal, I'm not focusing on it, it's really helping out. Okay, with my dev hat on, a little Cody, I love separation of concerns. I think all things that only talk to one thing should exist in one thing and shouldn't go somewhere else. And Instant Apps requires you to have separation of concerns. You're gonna end up doing modular code. We're gonna have some diagrams in a bit. But when you separate out your code and you say, this is what this code does, this is what it doesn't do, oh my God, it's so good. You can test it easier, you can do unit tests easier, you can do integration tests easier, you can actually do integration tests. Like, there's a lot of benefits to modularize your code outside of, oh, you can do Instant Apps. Code reuse is a really nice thing. My first worry when we did this, I said a year and a half ago or so, I got into the Instant Apps beta, and the first pass we did was at a very old SDK, and then I had to completely redo it to do it with a newer SDK. And the version that was that old SDK was on a different branch. And for like a month and a half, I had an Instant App running at the same time as my installed app. And if I changed the bug in one thing, I had to open up the other branch and change it. And that was just like, it's something you have to always put in the back of your mind. It's a hindrance. It's, oh, I'm adding this one thing. I have to remember to move it to this other place. So actually reusing code and not having to duplicate your own actions is really nice. And also, just if you haven't done it yet, you get to use Dagger because you're literally injecting things into places and having modules that depend on each other. So it's a really good excuse to actually do dependency injection. Okay, I talked about this a little bit already, but the key business objective difference for me is the flow for when someone clicks on a link to Stack Overflow is so drastically different. I get to show them the best experience the fastest way possible versus the mobile website that we have that has that app banner that I'm like, why would you even click on that app banner unless you want to install my app? That's the only purpose. It's not to interact with this because you could already interact with it. But that mobile web banner, we actually have a lot of logistics around it of showing it, hiding it, doing DK when they hit the X button, showing it 3 days later. But I have all of that stuff, and on top of it, I actually don't show that banner on embedded web views. So if you're in Twitter and it uses its own web view, because it can't access what do I actually use? I don't use a cookie jar, but the web storage of the regular one. I don't know if you've dismissed the banner, and I just want to be safe, so I don't show you the banner. So there's no way to even get to my app from the biggest social sharing endpoints. Versus now, you click on it, and my app just shows up. And every single time, it makes me giggle so much. I love it so much. It seems magical. OK, so I talked about this a lot, but the main thing is Instant Apps reduce friction. They reduce friction when it comes to getting the user to actually do what they want to do. They reduce friction when it comes to logging in, because it's mostly automatic. They reduce friction when it comes to installation. There's actually a lot of new Play Store APIs that do in-app, on-demand, in-dialog installation. And, I didn't put it on, but even payments are frictionless. There's a whole new payments API called Google Payments API that I'll talk about in a bit, but it lets you use your own provider like Stripe or Braintree to use with saved credit cards on Google accounts. So there's a lot of barriers to entry just being completely taken down. And from the user perspective side, from someone interacting with your app, from someone clicking on a link, you have a whole new first-time user experience to try to optimize. You can do anything you want to do with it. You can do a specific view of your app. You can do a branded thing for something. You can do whatever, but it gives you this new touch point with the user that's like your first attempt to delight them or have a nice interaction with them or not show them a pop-up. OK, before we get into actual specifics, all of this requires Android Studio 3, which is in Canary. I was going to say it's stable, and then it stopped working this morning, so I couldn't take screenshots of some stuff. So I'm not going to say it's stable, but it's it works. You can use it alongside Android Studio 2.3, and all of this stuff is first party in Android Studio 3.0. OK, I'm going to cut to the chase. The hardest part of all of this is I said mindset shift because having paradigm shift on a slide seemed weird. But the hardest thing about all of this is how you think about your app. Your app goes from being a monolithic thing that has a front door and people come and go through it to being a bundle of features. I'm going to do a stark transition for something out of the docs. OK, a bundle of features. This is an instant app. This gray thing says Instant App APK. That's the container for the Instant App. There's one feature, two features, and then a base. In the example that I'm going to talk about, we only have one feature, so it's just this guy and that one. But the point of this is an Instant App APK can do multiple things. We're going to call them features. They are limited user scope flows of trying to do a specific action. And they also have this little helper that's the base that's shared in all of your various instant apps. So if like your TripIt is one of the Instant Apps launch partners, and they have Instant Apps for coming to a flight link, to a hotel link, or a reservation link. And if you come in from all of those 3 different entry points, you see drastically different stuff based on what they know about you. And they all share that one little base module of code between all of them. The example we're going to go into, like I said, only has 1 feature and 1 base. And this is titled Instant App APK, but your full installed app APK will end up being similar to this too. Okay, so what's in an app? My app, Stack Exchange, you probably have participated on Stack Overflow at some point in your lives, hopefully, and no one's like shouted at you. But we allow people to do a lot of things. The biggest, like 90% of the use cases, is interacting with questions and answers. It's someone who's here to learn something, who's here to ask something, who's here to comment on something, who's here to say, hey, this doesn't make sense, who's here to say, hey, this API got deprecated. The second biggest use case, which is our front door in the app, is for searching and browsing. It's to find content. We have 170 now, communities of very drastically different information that you can learn, and we try to give that to the user. The ideal experience for the Stack Exchange app is, and always was, for someone to sit on their couch and spend 30 minutes browsing around and seeing what they want to do. And then the ending part is all of the actual high-touch KPIs that don't happen a lot, but I have to have a lot of flows around them. But it's the creation actions. It's asking a question. It's adding an answer. It's creating content. For me, each one of these could be their own instant app. I have just one instant app right now for the questions and answers, and I just have it for stackoverflow.com, not for our other communities. I'll get into the specifics why. But this one at the top could be an instant app to browse the content, which I have. This one could be an instant app to search, and this one can be an instant app to add an answer. Right now in the instant app that I have, that's one feature. If you click on a link to these stuff, it has a little pop-up come up that says, hey, would you like to install the app? But it very easily, instead of saying, would you like to install the app, it could just launch the next instant app and put them right into that flow, and it can use the next module of my app without installing the app. Okay, so this is everything that's in my app. Here's what my packages looked like before Android Instant Apps, like a year and a half ago. Very simply, there's one big app module. There's 2 support dependencies. The app module includes everything. It has all of my functionality. It has the login, it has the sign up, it has the analytics that go into those activities, it has the parent base fragment that those activities all use that includes the analytics. I use MVVM everywhere, it has a lot of view models, it has everything. It has a bunch of modules in it like core, DB, UI, utils, API. A lot of those are business application logic. Some of those are functionality feature logic. My other 2 modules, it seems like, based on what we're going to talk about, it seems moot to even call them modules. But there's 2 very small self-contained things. There's a Markdown editor in our app. If you try to ask or add an answer, it has a little toolbar that comes above the on-screen keyboard, and you can hit it to toggle bold or code or toggle whatever you want to toggle. And so we have all of those handlers in there, and the actual UI element that shows up, the linear layout that includes all those buttons, and all of the unit tests around what happens when someone clicks on one of those. And then the third module that I have is Stackman. It's our API module. It's I hate it so much. It uses Java futures because we made it a very long time ago before I was an actual full-time Android dev. So it's there's a lot of wrapping that goes around it, and it has a lot of access to our custom API airing and rate limiting and what happens if our API goes down and the callback back-off throttle that it gives us. And there's a lot of business logic around just calling the API. That's all contained in that module, and it has a bunch of unit tests. The things you might see that isn't here is I don't have a lot of tests in my app module. I have functionality tests that I open up something and I scroll and I'm make sure it doesn't crash. But for the most part, everything's really tied together, and I don't have a lot of tests, or I didn't have a lot of tests before Instant Apps. Okay, and in a sneak peek, so this is what we have now. That's what we're going to make. So that orange dashed thing is both your installed app and it's your instant app. This orange dash thing includes 2 new modules if you compare it to this one, but it's actually going to include a third one that we'll talk about in a second. But it has the shared module, which is the base module that was in a Google document. It's what my app, my installed app, and my instant app, and any other instant apps I make in the future. All of the code that they share. I called it shared, I'm not very creative. It has a feature for Q&A, that's question and answer. So that has all of the logic for displaying a question and answer. There's a lot of view models. We do a question and an answer directly underneath it. So there's a lot of recycler view stuff for loading them and for showing 1 answer, showing 20 answers, so on. All of that is in that. And for the actual full installed app, it's the entire container. It's all of the code in the app module, the code in the question and answer feature, the code in the shared library, and all of the other dependencies. Versus for the instant app APK, it's these 3. So it's the library, the shared library that we're about to make, the feature that includes the code just for showing questions and answers, and then we have a third module that's just a wrapper. It's you set a plugin type on it of com.android.instantApp, and then that generates a build variant for assemble instant app. And then the instant app can have multiple features in it, so it can have just this one thing and then link to the other stuff, or it can have all of them at the same time, and there's some file limitations, we'll get into that. But so it's these 3 new modules are the actual net difference between these two diagrams. Okay, it's gonna get codey and beware and whatever. Let's just get into it. Okay, so what's gonna be in your shared library? It's everything that's shared between the stuff. Which sounds simple, but you have to actually think through your app module and think what is in my app module that is business metrics, business goals. What is in my app module that is actual user-facing functionality that I'm trying to do? And for the most part, all of the stuff that are shared business logic, like your retrofit custom adapter, is going to be shared with all of the stuff that calls the network calls. So you can move it around. Shared external dependencies means Gradle imports, basically. Anything that you are importing on your app module can be moved over to this library because it's just a regular Android library. The thing that becomes a little difficult is your feature module can also have its own imports, but anytime you're adding a Gradle import to your feature module or to your app module, think, is this something that's going to be shared? Can I put this in one place instead? Say as much or as little as you like when it comes to the actual code, because this is a file size limit that's going to come up in a bit that I'll talk about, but it's also this is shared with everything. So if I have 3 instant apps for the question and answer flow, for the search, and for adding an answer, this shared library will be in every single one of them. So if there's anything that's not in every single one of them, I'm wasting some space over the wire. And you can also, it depends on what your code complexity is like, how you like to structure your architecture. You can have the base classes and then have something it's not too bad if your app module's version of showing something and your instant app's version of showing something have their own fragment, and in the fragments have call something else in the background. But if it's their own fragment and each is 800 lines and it's the exact same methods, you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be copy pasting code too much. Okay, so let's get into the actual flow. Step 1, you make a new module. It's a library. It's not anything fancy. I wish I had screenshots, but the Android Studio file new just stopped showing them. But when you make a new module, you get the choice between Android package or an Android library, or now an instant app feature or an instant app APK. And you just choose library. It's just a regular Android library. You're just moving code over to this shared library. Easiest ones to move over are support library. Just move them over from your app module into the shared library module, because probably you're going to be calling fragments in your application both times. This is the harder one. There's a lot of dread involved. Make a new feature module. It's an actual module with a plugin type com.android.feature. Depending on how you have your UI set up, if you have I have single activity with a bunch of different fragments that can come into it, so my feature module needs to have a single activity that can hold on to that fragment. You might not need to make a second activity. But the next thing is to just flat out copy paste the UI code. So the fragment, the recycler view adapters, the view models, all of the stuff, just bring them all over. If you're like me and you freak out about red airlines, disable Android Studio's automatic build. We're going to be in a bad place for a while. For me, this was around a few weeks the first time I was doing it. The second time I was doing it was around 45 minutes. There's a code lab that will help you get through the process of it in around 30 minutes. But there's a lot of There's a lot of dread involved. There's a lot of, oh no, I made everything break involved. But eventually, you will get through something. Yeah. In the future module, we're going to go through every single file one by one, and we're going to only look at the top of it. We're going to look at the imports and just look for the red. There's going to be a lot of easy first pass stuff of you're importing classes that exist in your app module. For me, those were classes that lived in modules like core or UI. I, for some crazy reason, have my own entire rewrite of recycler view. It's for a very specific reason, but that's the pain of Android. But so I had to bring over my entire recycler view over into my shared library. All of the actual like shared UI elements that the code is already modularized in a different thing, like core or UI or API or something where you at one point knew that this isn't your actual app logic. This is just going through the imports. All of the files, we're just going through the import section. Okay, this is the actual like hard part. Now you go through all of the files and you go through the actual code. There's going to be a lot of code that is in two places. There's going to be a lot of code that is in your feature module and is also in your app module. There's going to be a lot of references to things that don't exist in this feature. For anything that's like, for my easiest case is like if you're looking at a question and answer and you click on a user's profile picture. I had 4 different like flows to get to the user's profile page from that flow. I just stubbed every single one of them out. And I was like, to do, I'm going to figure out how I'm going to handle profiles. Do that for everything in every single file. This part really, like I'm the kind of developer that requires to see what's happening. Like when I have a crash, someone tells me there's a bug in my app, I'm like, give me a repro because I don't believe you. I need to see it with my own eyes to make sure that it actually happened. And I'm always living in fear of my own code, which I don't have tests, so you can understand why I'm in fear of my own code. But for me, this was the hardest part, because every single day I was moving stuff around and nothing still compiled, and I thought it would work, and it turned out that I was using Java 8 retro lambda, and I needed to move off the Java 8 stuff for this one. Like, it became just a thing, and it becomes hairy, and you can go down a rabbit nest very quickly. But if you just stick to stubbing everything out and trying to get to the point where things compile, it's not too bad. Okay, so the hardest parts about this: don't rewrite code. Don't write any new code. You will see stuff that uses like async tasks, and you're like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I don't even want anyone to know that I did this at some point in my life. Leave it. You were here to get the code to compile again. So if you start refactoring stuff, you just end up doing nothing. The first time that I did the Instant Apps integration, I was like having a quiet summer, so I kind of let myself do whatever I wanted. It was also, there was a major Rx Java API endpoint change, but it wasn't the Rx Java 1 to 2 change, but there was like things in the ether that I knew I was behind on, and I was like, you know what? I have the time, I'm gonna dedicate it to it. I had to delete that branch of code 3 times just because I got nowhere, it didn't compile, I didn't know what was happening, I don't know what was my old code, I don't know what was my new code, I don't know what the thing was trying to do. So just while you're doing this, you're going to be looking at a lot of old code. Don't rewrite it. Leave it exactly as it is. Move it around into places, but don't edit the contents outside of deleting it and saying, hey, I'm going to figure this out later. Don't write any new abstractions. I wrote a lot of interfaces. I've been doing Java for a very long time, and I really like Java, and I really like abstractions and interfaces. Don't do that, because then you get in situations where it's like, where does this abstraction live? Does it live in the shared library, or does it live in the featured library, or is this something that is meant to communicate with the app module? And it's just like it's overthinking it for all of this. Just move code around, treat it like parts of like not even text, like images. Move it around, move it somewhere else if you need to, and try to get the thing to compile. Okay, so going back on the before and after. Before, all I had was the app module. That was this monolithic thing that has every single thing on the planet. Now, that app module is still kind of monolithic. It has everything, but the main guts of looking at the question and answer is taken out of it. The app module, there's a lot of cross-dependencies here. The app module depends on the shared module. The Q&A feature depends on the shared module. And the app module and Q&A feature actually have some duplicated code in how they interact with the thing in the shared module, because the thing in the shared module is my custom view that's like a post view that can show the question and answer. And then on the different 2 cases, I have an activity that holds a bunch of fragments, or an activity that only holds this fragment. There's also another module that I mentioned that isn't in this, but the com.android.instant app is the thing that's actually generating your instant app. It builds a build variant for your instant app. Okay, after the first time it launches, you should if you do what I do, you run around, you scream, you tell people, and they all have you repeat what the actual benefit of this is. You say it really excitedly, and they say, oh, so the thing you spent last year working on, people will actually see. And I'll say, yeah, it's really exciting. Be happy for me. But like, you should celebrate. It's a really cool thing. But after you get the first thing to launch, you have a lot of decisions to make, because we're going to repeat all of that process for everything. For a link to anything in your activity that you stubbed out and you said, I'll deal with this later, think about what you want to do with it. Think about if you want to put it in your feature. Think about if you want to make a new feature. Think about if it should only be available in your installed app. You have a lot of things that you can do. The hardest one is if you want to add it to this feature or if you want to make it into a new feature. And remember, one instant app can have 2 features. So if you want to do that, you have to just flat out make a new module, copy paste the code over, play the refactoring game all over again. Now that you have 2 modules, you figure out there's some stuff in shared that didn't really need to be in shared because it's not in the second module. So maybe you chunk out the shared module to be like shared UI and shared core. But it's just the same game as what we just did. OK, install prompt, getting people to actually install your app. There's 2 different types of it, explicit and implicit. And explicit install is a button that actually says install. And you can put it anywhere in the app. You can have it on the home screen of the app. You can have it in the navigation drawer. You can do whatever you want to do with it. For my case, I don't actually have any explicit buttons in the navigation or the app itself. But if you try to log in and you don't have an account, it says, hey, would you like to sign up? Would you like to install to sign up? Implicit prompts are the user tries to do something that they thought they could do because we share the same UI, the same look, and they can't do it. And you just give them a little pop-up, and you give them a little explanation of, in my case, it's, hey, trying to look at user profiles requires installing the app. Or it could be, hey, looking at user profiles requires using a second instant app. But just figure out what you want to do with them, and just show the user the prompt when they need it. It's not too bad. The Instant Apps actual API, there's a class called Instant Apps. It has 2 methods, very big class. One method is returns a Boolean. It's is instant app. And you can use this in your shared code. I don't actually use this in my shared code. It felt weird for my shared code to depend on an instant apps class. So I have this as a flag that I pass in when I call methods in my shared code. But it's just to switch up the flow for what happens when someone tries to do something in the instant app versus in the installed app. And then the second method is for the implicit installs that I just talked about. This shows a in-app dialog Play Store. And they can click install on it, and it installs the app from the Play Store, and then your app launches. It's like the fastest way to install an app ever. It's really cool. It's embedded Play Store inside of your app in a little dialog just by calling this show install prompt method. OK, the end goal of when you're migrating your code over, when you're changing your modules, when you're decoupling your code, when you're modularizing it, is heavy code reuse. You don't want to be editing something once in 2 places. You want to be editing something once and it works in 2 places. You don't want any duplicated code. You want separation of concerns. You want modularized code. You want things that are with the things that they should be with, because that lets you do a lot of things. It lets you unit test them easier. It lets you do actual functionality tests on them, black box, and saying, oh, hey, all of this stuff is stubbed out. Well, it actually is stubbed out. It's not in this code. The end result should hopefully be a really nice module, heavy code reuse package. OK, so the stuff to think about for the context of instant app outside of just doing the first instant app is what is actually your wrapper? Like, what's your main activity? What's your launch point into your application? And I don't mean this from the user flow side, although I do mean it for the user flow side too. I mean, what is the default application class that opens up in your app? What is the default activity? What does it do? In my case, the default activity holds on to 17 different fragments, and it has a navigation drawer, and it can do this, and it can do that. In my app, in my instant app, it doesn't do any of that. It holds onto a fragment, and it can take the intent string and say, oh, they're trying to look at this question. Let me show this question. It's a very drastic difference for the entry point of the app. If you do login, you have to do Google Smart Lock. Smart Lock lets you store username and password. It lets you store Google login information. It lets you store login information from any service, really. The really nice thing about the Smart Lock login is the first time someone comes to your instant app and they try to log in and they have the Google Smart Lock login happen, the next time they open up your instant app, even if it's like weeks or months later, they're logged in automatically. They get a little banner that says their name. Everything seems really cool. You can change the state to show whatever they can do now. So it's a really cool magical experience. I had this in the slides. For physical payments, there's a brand new API called Google Payment API. It is really cool. It is very much so like the current API that exists, and it lets you access the credit cards that people have saved on your Google account, but you get to use your own processor. You get to use Stripe, you get to use Braintree, you get to use whatever you want, and actually connected with the APIs that you would normally have. And then the hardest actual step thing is everything is modular, all the permissions are too. So if someone doesn't want to give you a permission for something, you can't crash. You have to actually interact and do what they expect it to do, just degraded. Okay, so zooming out a little, talking about what the actual logistics of the world around this is. When it comes to launching your Instant app, you're going to build an Instant app APK. It's very similar to building a regular APK. You upload it on the Google Play Store. It's very similar to uploading a regular app. It has the same kind of 3 tiers on the Play Store, so it's not too bad. When it comes to the actual connecting of how people are going to end up in it, there's a difference between launching it by calling the intent manager and activity manager on your console and someone clicking on the link. You need to prove that you actually own the app and the link. You do that via Google App Links. Do I have an example? Yes. Okay, so this is literally what's on stackoverflow.com/well-known/assetlinks.json. And it's just showing a connection between my app and the website. It's showing that the website, https://stackoverflow.com, gives the permission handle all URLs to my app. My app's name is com.stackexchange.marvin, the paranoid Android. And then the certificates for the APK, there's the production APK, and then the one for when I build it on my own computer so I can test. And then this does all of it. This is all of the verification step. This is all of the actual specifics of launching your Instant app when the user clicks on a link. This JSON file is checked on app install. On your Android manifest side, you have an intent filter that says auto verify equals true. And that means that for this intent filter, go through every single host and check that the host actually has given us permission. So I was really worried about this part, and it became I was worried it was going to be a whole thing with the web guys, and they're like, oh, you want a static file? That's super easy. Let's just take care of it. So it's not too big of a thing to worry about, but you need to have this to actually do an Instant app. Okay, I mentioned this. Now I should actually mention it. Size limitations. It's all about launching really quick apps, which means you can't have a lot of bloat. So when it comes to something going over the wire, when in my initial demo, I clicked on a link to stackoverflow.com and that loading icon showed up, everything that's transferring through that wire needs to be under 4 megabytes. That sounds really small, but remember, this is one specific part of your app. This is a very limited use case of your app. I'm at 2.7 megabytes, and I thought I was going to hit 4 megabytes. So I'm not even using ProGuard. It's not too hard to do this. It's just something you need to be aware of. One caveat is this is checked when you're uploading your APK to the Play Store. So you will know immediately if it's too big. Second thing, these APKs use the new version 2 signing method. So they have multiple things inside them that have their own signatures. And when it comes to those multiple things, the APK includes the feature, at least one, and the base. So for my case, that's the shared library and then the Q&A feature. It can include multiple features, but when it comes to it, the size over the wire is that entire bundle. It's the feature and the shared library that goes with it. That's why we can't have too much bloat in the shared library. Other caveat, if you're doing multiple Instant apps, if someone is interacting with your first Instant app and they click on a link to something that opens up in a second Instant app, like for my case, when I eventually add answer or ask question as an Instant app, when that second Instant app is loading, the 4 megabyte doesn't include the base because the base is already downloaded. So that's just it's the bundle in general. The bundle includes the shared library, and if they've already loaded the bundle once, that shared library is not going to get downloaded again. That doesn't mean make your past first point interactions really heavy because those interaction points probably have their own side entry too, so they need to be less than 4 megabytes, but you can keep that in mind. Okay. The actual, when it comes to launching and thinking about the business perspectives and blah, 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 the biggest thing is use a different analytics key. The people are going to interact differently. The user flows are different. They're coming to do different stuff. They're coming from different entry points. The entire flow of this is different, so don't just use the exact same analytics that you're using. Use a new key to differentiate between what you're doing. You can use Google Analytics for Firebase. Is that the full name? I think that's the full name. You can use Google Analytics for Firebase to give a lot of actual actions. So you can store, here's what happened, here's what this happened, here's what this, and you can also just, it's part of the Google Analytics SDK, so that's not too bad. Like I already went through this a little, but when you do it, you publish with the Play Store, you just upload the Instant App APK. There's 3 tiers you can do. They're not called the same 3 tiers. I don't know what they're called now, but it's like dev, staging, and prod, but it's not that. And then this is a really important thing to keep in mind for people like me who are in charge of the entire perspective of mobile web and native app, and we want to figure out like cross-product KPIs. When you're publishing an instant app, you can set a percentage of how many people, when they click on a link, are going to go back to your mobile website. So you can actually test the different flows. If there's something like, if your payment if your application, like the final endpoint is paying for something, you can check the funnels of someone buying on mobile web versus buying on native app, all via the instant app, just by modifying this mobile web holdback amount. Okay, just to recap everything. Building an instant app is not building a new app. It is a mindset shift. Like the hardest part about it is thinking about your app as a bundle of features and decomposing your app into what those features are and what the shared library is. The goal of an instant app is to help your user do something. The goal of an instant app is not to get your app installs. It's proven to help your app get installs, but they're here to do something. They didn't open up the door and say, what's going on? What are we cooking for dinner? Who's hanging out here? They open up the door to come to a specific thing and look at it and get something and do something with it. Help them do that, not focus on getting an app installed. I know that sounds really like worrisome because we're app developers and install numbers matter a lot, but this is really changing what the focus is for like my team in particular. My focus is no longer getting installs and session numbers for my app because the session numbers for my app no longer correspond to the installs. So it's focusing on what does the user want to do and helping him get there. Okay, next steps. Think about your use cases. What do people want to do? How does your code base split up into sections? Do you already have some stuff structured to be split up? Just have that in the back of your head. You can modularize your code anytime you want. Like I said, I have a lot of tests now because this lets me do this. I love separation of concerns and modularizing your code. You don't need to do this for instant apps. You don't even need to wait until something is going to be used in an instant app feature to modularize it. You can just separate out the code. And then I love code labs. There's a code lab called Build Your First Android Instant App. It takes you through the process of having an application that has like a little memory puzzle game and then separating out into a shared library and then having a feature module and then launching the instant app. And there's a lot of, it says it's around 45 minutes. There's a lot of like verbiage, and let's talk about the concept of apps as features. You should be able to like skip through that one now because you know it. But it's really fun. Try to do that if you don't have your own code to work on this. And even if you don't think you want to build an instant app, modularize the code. It's really fun. Okay, that's all I got. Cool. I'm around all day and tomorrow, and I live in Denver, so I'm always here. So if you have any questions or anything, please come find me.